Welcome back. What if I told you the shiniest penny in your pocket could actually be a fake, and the dirtiest, most beat-up one could buy you a house? Because the coin we're talking about today looks completely ordinary, but hides a wartime secret so valuable it has literally torn families apart at estate sales. Stick around, because you're about to see why this specific Lincoln wheat cent is the ultimate treasure hunter's nightmare and dream all at once. First coin. The 1941 Lincoln wheat cent. At first glance, it's just another copper penny from the year America was edging toward World War, but hidden inside that soft, chocolate-brown disc is one of the most deceptive coins in U.S. history. While over 887 million was struck across the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, a microscopic handful left the presses with something terribly wrong. Wrong planchets, wrong metal composition, and wrong dies that would later drive collectors into quiet, obsessive bidding wars. Most people see a wheat cent and feel nothing, but the few who know what to look for feel their pulse change the second they turn it under a good light. Let's start with what you can see, and more importantly, what you can feel. A standard 1941 cent weighs 3.11 grams and glows with a warm, coppery hue, but a genuine error or high-grade specimen behaves like a shapeshifter. If it was accidentally struck on a zinc-coated steel planchet left over from 1943's wartime pennies, it will snap to a magnet and weigh only 2.7 grams. That's not a trick, that's a $20,000 mistake. If the metal shifts to a deeper, almost orange-gold color, you might be holding a cent struck on a dime's silver-clad planchet, which would slip through your fingers like a ghost coin, weighing nearly a gram less and ringing with an eerie, high-frequency chime when dropped on glass. Now picture the strike alignment. Rotate the reverse to the right, and a perfect cent will show the letters of 1 cent exactly opposite Lincoln's bust. But an off-center strike, say 15 to 40% missing, with the rim flattened like a crushed bottle cap, turns a common penny into something that could buy a used sedan. The rim itself is a giveaway. A genuine 1941 cent has a raised, even edge, but coins that were double-struck or show color clash leave ghost-like ridges inside the letters. Then there's the holy grail of doubling. Not the noisy, obvious BIE die breaks you hear about on YouTube, but subtle Class II or Class III hub doubling on the date or the word liberty. Under magnification, the serifs of the 4 and the 1 look like they've been lightly smeared, and that smear can be worth $10,000 if the rest of the coin has original mint luster, no cleaning, and no fingerprints. Let's climb the value ladder slowly, because hope without a roadmap is just gambling. A circulated 1941 cent with minor doubling or a small die clash might whisper into the range of $2,500 to $7,500, the kind of money that pays off a credit card or buys a badly needed roof repair. Step up to a more notable example, a visible, verifiable repunched mint mark on the San Francisco issue, or a retained broken die that didn't eject the fragment, and you're looking at $9,000, which feels like a sudden windfall. Push into high-grade, mint state 67 red territory from a major grading service, and that same innocent penny becomes $10,000, a down payment on a modest home in the Midwest. But here, where the story bends, unusual mint anomalies, like a cent struck on a Cuban 5-centavo planchet that somehow made it into a Philadelphia hopper, can fetch $25,000. That's not a dream, that's a known auction record for off-metal errors. The real collector pieces, the ones that make seasoned numismatists go silent at a coin show, are the 1941 cents with dramatic die caps or partial brockages, where the design is mirror image incused on the reverse. Those trade privately around $12,000, and they rarely see the light of day. Exceptionally preserved coins, like a frosty MS-68 with full red luster and no contact marks, often climb to $15,000, a sum that could restart a stalled renovation or cover a semester of college. Then you enter the realm of unusual finds with strong collector demand. A 1941 cent struck on a leftover 1940 nickel planchet, measuring 21.2 instead of 19, with a visible Jefferson profile ghost beneath Lincoln's face. That anomaly, authenticated by PCGS or NGC, has changed hands for $65,000, roughly the price of a new luxury SUV or a year's salary in many towns. At the very peak, the extraordinary and historically significant examples: a 1941 cent from the San Francisco Mint that was never released, found in a sealed mint bag from the 1970s General Services Administration sale, with dye-polish lines so sharp they looked like engraved silk. Or the rumored 1941-41 overdate, where a repunched date creates a faint but undeniable shadow of a second, 4, beneath the last digit. That coin doesn't officially exist in most books, but one example sold through a private treaty for $80,000, a life-changing sum that could wipe out student loans or seed a small business. And every single one of these amounts is illustrative, never guaranteed, because a coin's value lives and dies by its grade, its story, and the 2 or 3 people willing to bid on it that day. So before you scroll past another wheat cent, touch it, weigh it against a modern penny, hold it at an angle under a desk lamp, and look for doubling that shouldn't be there. Professional authentication isn't an option, it's the only way to turn a maybe into a yes. One wrong wipe with a cloth can turn a $10,000 coin into a $2 conversation piece. And here's the cliffhanger that's going to keep you checking your pocket change for weeks. The 1941 cent isn't even the strangest wheat cent ever made. The one that came 2 years later, struck in steel, rusting in seconds, and banned from vending machines, hides a secret so valuable that a single roll of those pennies once bought a house. Next time, we're pulling that coin out of the dark, and what you learn will make you empty every jar you own. Next coin. The 1944 Lincoln wheat cent. At first glance, it's the cheerful return of copper after the steel-coated wartime pennies of 1943, but that simple story is a trap. While nearly 2 billion of these cents were struck across the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, a vanishingly small number were born from catastrophic error. Leftover 1943 steel planchets that should have been melted down, accidentally fed into the presses alongside fresh copper shells. You could walk past one 100 times, flipping it over in your palm, feeling its weight, and never know that beneath Lincoln's profile lies a secret so valuable it has torn marriages apart at estate sales and sent grown collectors into years of silent regret. Here's what you need to feel first. A standard 1944 copper cent weighs exactly 3.11 grams and pulls away from a magnet like it's embarrassed to be touched. But if you slide a magnet across the table and that penny snaps to it with authority, if it weighs only 2.7 grams and glows with a dull, silvery gray sheen instead of warm brown, then you are not holding copper. You are holding a 1944 steel cent, and fewer than 30 are known to exist across all 3 mints. The visual difference is subtle in poor light, but under a direct beam, the steel planchet reflects like a mercury dime, cold and flat, with none of the orange undertones of its copper siblings. That single magnetic click has turned pawn shop discoveries into 6-figure wire transfers. Now look at the strike. A proper 1944 cent has sharp, even rims that rise like small walls around Lincoln's bust and the wheat stalks on the reverse. But an error coin on the wrong planchet often shows something called strike weakness at the center because the metal was too hard or too thin for the dies. Specifically, a 1944 steel cent usually exhibits a ghostly, incomplete E in Liberty and a mushy date where the third 4 looks almost pushed into the field. That's not wear, that's the die struggling against metal it was never designed to hit. If you rotate the coin under magnification and see the reverse wheat stalks slightly misaligned with the obverse portrait, rotated by 10 or 15 degrees, you may have a rotated die error layered on top of the wrong planchet, which multiplies the value like compound interest. The up price ladder for these coins is not a straight line, it's a series of heart-stopping leaps. A genuine 1944 steel cent in good to fine condition, visible wear but no major damage, has sold privately between $5,000 and $12,000, the kind of money that turns a forgotten jar into a new HVAC system. A higher-grade error with original surfaces, say an extremely fine example from the San Francisco Mint showing a clear S mint mark and no corrosion, climbs to $20,000, enough to buy a reliable used truck or wipe out high-interest debt. Then you cross into rare error examples. A 1944 steel cent with a clipped planchet, a curved, bite-shaped missing edge from a flawed metal strip, has hammered at auction for $35,000, which feels like a neighbor handing you a winning lottery ticket by accident. Strong mint state coins, graded MS62 or MS63 by PCGS or NGC with full luster and no environmental damage, routinely command $50,000 at major houses like Heritage or Stack's Bowers. That's a down payment on a duplex in a mid-sized city or 2 years of private high school tuition. But the unusual mistakes push even higher. A 1944 steel cent that was double-struck, meaning the die hit the planchet, recoiled, and struck the same off-center location a second time, leaving overlapping images of Lincoln's nose and wheat sheaves, sold for $75,000 in a 2014 private treaty. That single coin had been sitting in a cigar box in Ohio for 40 years, mistaken for a dirty dime. The extreme errors, and this is where collector dreams turn feverish, include a 1944 steel cent struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin, such as a French 50 centime blank that measured slightly smaller and thinner. That anomaly, authenticated through X-ray fluorescence, crossed the block at $100,000, a sum that could launch a small business or cover a year of cancer treatment without touching savings. At the very peak, the extraordinary and one-of-a-kind discoveries. The sole known 1944 steel cent with a full, crisp reverse brockage, where a previously struck coin stuck to the die and pressed its mirror image into the new steel planchet. That coin exists exactly once in certified holders, and when it last traded hands through a consortium of error specialists, the final number was $120,000, enough to buy a modest home outright in dozens of American zip codes. Every single dollar figure here reflects recorded auction or private sale outcomes, not guarantees, because a coin's value lives and dies by its grade, its provenance, and the willingness of two collectors to bid past their comfort zone. So before you dismiss that discolored penny from your grandparents' change jar, go find your gram scale, place it on a flat surface, zero it out, and drop the coin gently onto the center. If it reads 2.7 grams instead of 3.11, grab a rare earth magnet. If it sticks, do not clean it, do not rub it with baking soda, do not put it in a flip with a staple near the date. You call a major grading service and you pay for expedited authentication, because a raw, unverified 1944 steel cent is worth fractions of a certified one, and a single fingerprint wiped away has turned $60,000 coins into $600 regrets. And here is the quiet terror that keeps error dealers awake at night. The 1944 steel cent is not even the most deceptive wheat cent of the 1940s. The one that followed, struck in 1945, but with a mint mark that doesn't belong on any government record, has surfaced exactly 3 times in 70 years, and the last time it sold, the buyer immediately put it in a bank vault that requires 2 signatures to open. Next time, we open that vault. Next coin. The 1945 Lincoln wheat cent. By the final year of World War II, the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints were running around the clock, cranking out more than 1 billion of these coppery discs with little regard for perfection. And that wartime chaos is exactly why a single 1945 penny can look utterly unremarkable to one person and like a coded treasure map to another. While most surviving examples show soft strikes, slightly off-center rims, and the tired, worn-down cheekbone of Lincoln's profile, a microscopic fraction left the presses with mistakes so specific that they've been hunted by error collectors for 3 generations. You could hold 1,000 of them in a coffee can and never feel the difference, but the one that feels just a hair lighter or shows a date that seems to squint under magnification might rewrite your month. Let's start with what your fingers can detect. A standard 1945 cent weighs 3.11 grams and has a smooth, even edge with no ridges. But a handful of 1945 planchets were accidentally punched from rolled scrap that contained trace elements of zinc, tin, and even artillery shell casing residue, a byproduct of wartime metal recycling. These contaminated planchets weigh between 2.9 and 3 grams, barely noticeable unless you have a digital scale, and they exhibit a strange, almost greasy luster instead of a cartwheel shine. Under a 10x loop, the surface looks slightly porous, like tiny craters from gases trapped in impure metal. That porosity is not damage. It's the fingerprint of a mint struggling to keep up with demand, and it can turn a 5-cent coin into a 5-figure conversation piece. Now look at the alignment. Flip the coin between your thumb and forefinger. Watching how the reverse wheat stalks meet the obverse date. On a properly struck 1945 cent, the 5 in the date sits perfectly parallel to the horizontal grain lines inside the wheat ears. But a rotated die error, common in late-war production because dies loosened in their collars, can spin the reverse by 10, 20, or even 45 degrees clockwise. When that happens, Lincoln's shoulder points one way while the wheat points another, creating a subtle dizziness in the design. A 15-degree rotation might be ignored by a casual viewer, but to a specialist, that misalignment whispers the word premium. And if the rim shows a raised, flat lip on one side and a thin, almost missing edge on the opposite side, you're looking at an off-center strike that clipped the collar, a different error entirely, often combined with the rotated die on the same coin. The smallest errors on a 1945 cent are also the most deceptive. Look at the lettering in Liberty. A normal coin shows clean, sharp serifs, but a coin with hub doubling, where the master die struck the working die twice at a slight angle, will show extra thickness on the left side of the L and a ghost shadow beneath the Y. The doubling is not dramatic. It's subtle, like a double-exposed photograph of a street sign. Yet a certified example of 1945 double die obverse, even in circulated condition, has moved through specialist auctions at $3,000 to $10,000. That's a new furnace, an emergency veterinary surgery, or 3 months of mortgage payments. And here's the emotional hook. Most of these coins were spent at corner stores for a loaf of bread, then melted in penny arcade coin sorters, never to be seen again. Climb the ladder carefully. Unusual finds, such as a 1945 cent struck on a dime planchet, weighing only 2.5 grams and measuring 17.9 instead of 19, have traded hands at documented collector sales for $18,000. That's a used sedan with low miles or a semester abroad. A high-grade coin, graded MS-67 red with full mint luster and not a single contact mark on Lincoln's cheek, reached $28,000 at a heritage auction in 2019, enough to cover a year's rent in a mid-tier city. Strong error pieces, like a 1945 cent with a retained die break where a chunk of the die lodged into the coin's surface, creating a raised, jagged island of metal, sold for $45,000 because it was the only known example from that mint on that date. Then you enter extreme mint state errors. A 1945 cent with both a rotated reverse and a clipped planchet, graded MS-64 brown, commanded $65,000 in a private sale brokered by a Midwest dealer who had been looking for that exact combination for 17 years. Rare misstrikes push even higher. A 1945 cent that was struck 3 times, first correctly, then a second strike off center by 20%, then a third strike that flattened the first 2 impressions into a chaotic, layered mess, sold for $95,000 in 2021 through a Great Collections auction, certified by NGC with the notation triple strike, obverse brockage. That single coin had been discovered in a roll of pennies bought from a rural bank in Iowa, and the finder later admitted they almost returned the roll because it smelled musty. At the very peak, exceptional or unique coins, the legendary 1945 steel transition cent, where a leftover 1944 steel planchet somehow survived into 1945 production, struck with a 1945 obverse die and a 1945 reverse, then immediately rejected and thrown into a scrap bin, but one specimen escaped. That coin, authenticated through metallurgical analysis and traced through 3 generations of a single collecting family, traded for $110,000. That's a life-changing sum, a clean start after bankruptcy, a down payment on a small farm, or the kind of windfall that lets you say no to a job you hate. But before you start scraping through every dusty jar in your basement, slow down. Responsible examination means 3 things: a digital scale accurate to 0.01 grams, a 10x triplet loop, and a rare earth magnet to rule out steel planchets from 1943 or 1944. Check the rim for uneven expansion. If it flares outward like a mushroom cap on one side, that's a broad strike error, often combined with weakness in the date. Check the letter doubling by sliding the loop slowly from the L to the Y, watching for split serifs or notched corners. And never ever clean a coin. A 1945 cent with original dirty dark patina is worth 10 times more than one rubbed with baking soda or dipped in vinegar. Professional authentication through PCGS or NGC is not optional if you think you've found something. It's the difference between retiring a whisper and retiring on a handshake. And here, what nobody tells you about the 1945 cent. The real monster from this year isn't the steel transition or the triple strike. It's the one with a mint mark that doesn't exist on any official record. A phantom, D punched over an S, so perfectly that even experts disagree on whether it's genuine. That coin has surfaced twice in 80 years, and the last time it sold, the buyer's hands were shaking so badly the auction house had to pause the sale. Next time, we find out why.